Welcome to day 6 of the 18-meter nationals held in Minden, Nevada. This was the 6th contest day. It was held on Wednesday, June 18th, 2014. And very interesting day. Just a quick look at the weather. And this is from Dave Nadler's blog. I'll have this copied in the notes below the video so you can go take a look at it yourself. There was a high to the north, which is going to suppress the afternoon westerlies, so lighter winds. Strong cold front had crossed, well, weak cold front, but rain and a decent cold front had come through the night before. There was snow in the mountains, and it was well below freezing in the desert to the east. So it was much colder, much weaker, and the heating was going to take a long time to mix, so it was going to be a shorter day. The NAM was showing climbs to 14,000, other models were showing less, and light winds in general. The next day, the final day, was going to be similar but better. So it was funny. John Cochran made the comment before the task that we ought to do well because Minden doesn't get any closer to the Midwest than today. So it was relatively weak. The average speeds for the day were in the 70s, where most of the days we'd been in the 90s. So anyway, the overall standings in the contest after this day were as follows. Doug Jacobs, Rick Walters, Gary Ittner, John Cochran, Bill Gawthorpe, Sean Fiddler, Grant Martin, Pete Alexander, Tim Wells, and Eric Nelson rounding up the top 10. And then you had Tom Kelly, Ray Gimme, Rick Andrebo, Dennis Linekin, Sam Zimmerman, who had an unfortunate moment. He had to start his motor today, which dropped him quite a bit. He was in 5th or 6th. Steve Nichols, Tim Gardner, Dave Nadler, who had a 1,000-point penalty for accidentally nipping an airspace on a previous day. So had 1,000 points to his score, which is a lot higher than where he is there. Brian Milner, Frank Painter, who had to leave the contest, and Phil Rose, who was a guest today. So we actually had 21 gliders flying today. On the daily score, I was doing better. I sort of reveled in the weaker conditions, more of a rhythm that I'm used to, and I was also much more comfortable with the terrain in the mountains and sort of knew what was going on. So I had a really good day. Just barely nipped out Doug, only 8 points ahead. Third was Ray Gimme, who was coming on stronger and stronger, and Ray wins the 15-meter nationals just after this contest. And I think he had a land out or some problem early in the week that dropped him back a little bit. Fourth for today was John Cochran, who's flying incredibly consistent to this point for a Eastern flatland pilot. Fifth for the day was Gary Ittner, also hyper consistent. Sixth, Rick Andrebo in a 15-meter ASW 27, which is impressive in and of itself. Seventh, Grant Martin, who's from Montague in California. And let's see, 8th, Dave Nadler, very good flight for Dave. 9th, Tim Wells, and 10th, Bill Gawthorpe in the JS1. The task was finally an assigned task, or at least a modified assigned task, which I was excited about. I do not like the assigned area tasks in general. 3-hour minimum time and a number of turns. I'll go through this here with you quickly. The start here, the south start, up to Tiger for a 1-mile radius, down to Ranch, and that was going to be a very difficult leg. The question was, do you go back onto the pine nuts and come over, or do you try and come through this valley on a direct line? So once you hit Ranch, it was back over to Topaz, and then up to Dayton, and down to Double Springs, and finally back up to Carson, and then it ended at that point. I've drawn, for some reason it's not rendering here, but I've drawn, it was up to Carson and then back to the finish in the 3 hours, but I was able to tack on Dayton and just finish a minute or two over. Let's see, yeah, 1 minute 30 over. So that was what was able to get me the win on the day. And I do remember Doug Jacobs was ahead as usual on this day. He came down into Carson, and I think he tried to come down to Pine Nut or Double Spring or something, and maybe didn't make it, or just turned around and finished. But really the problem he had was timing, and maybe he made a little bit of a mistake in picking where he was going to go. But I came in high enough so that I was able to just perfectly hit Dayton and final glide into Minden without turning, and it just sort of luck worked out perfect for me on this day. So I'll take it, but I think Doug fundamentally flew better, as he normally does today as well. So that's the task. We've talked about the weather, we've talked about the scores, and let's get into the flight. So just real quick, John Cochran's log doesn't synchronize, unfortunately, so he's not in here, but this is the first 7, or 6, minus John Cochran, who was, I don't know, 4th or 5th for the day. So you have 7 Tango Sean Fiddler, Doug Jacobs, DJ, 7 Victor, that's Ray Gimme, Papa 7, that's Gary Ittner, Yankee Charlie, Rick Andribo, and 4-3 Martin Grant. And over here I haven't done that yet. Let me pause it and synchronize it up. Okay, so I have the same the same statistics over here on this side. So this is a 3D view, this is a 2D view. I'll do most of my narration here on the 3D view and then kick over here for the 2D view. I can't remember whether it was blue or not today, but I think these last 2 days were generally blue. Oh, I'll switch my screens, pause again, sorry. Okay, so we're 3D here, 2D here, and ready to go. So I think today was the day that I had a pitot tube problem, and I had to come back and land and get that fixed. It just wasn't pushed in all the way, and fortunately I was able to get up and restart, and it wasn't hyper beneficial to start first, or there was enough time for me to get up. So I think what happened here is the launch has already started, and this flight has, I actually launched first today or second today, but I had to come back and land immediately. So I'll be the last person launching here. So that was a little bit stressful. It's the first time I've ever really had a problem. Let's see if this shows me coming back. Yeah, so on this day before the replay begins, I had already come back and landed, so I think I'm the last guy. Those airplanes you see on the field there are the guys that have the bad sync on their files. I think those are clear navs, but I'm not sure. So you can see I'm the last launch. Everybody's up high, and Martin and I are struggling to get up here. So here's the start cylinder here, so everybody's still trying to get up. A few people are wandering back into the start cylinder. I'm up to, it's 12,000 feet is the minimum start altitude. And I remember really struggling to find the climbs that I was looking for off the pine nuts. And you can see Grant and I are still struggling quite a bit. And I think here I'm, say, forget the pine nuts, it's not working. I can see gliders higher out here. So I come out and try and find thermals in the valley. Actually, so this is interesting. So let me go back to the last thermal. So the highest I get here is 11.5, 11.6, 11.7. So it's a weaker day, and what I decide is gliders are already starting. I can just had the sense of that, and then maybe there was a few calls. So I decide, forget it. The best climbs are out here on the pine nuts, and this is the first time that I have not started out the top of the cylinder. I literally just go in, touch it, and come right back onto the pine nuts. And I do that for two reasons. I don't want to get way behind the group, and I just don't think the day is strong enough to really find a strong climb out the top here. You can barely get up on the pine nuts, and I just don't want to get that far behind the herd. So I come out here and start there. Now other people have had better starts. Rick and Doug have just started out the side here and are coming back onto the pine nuts. So actually not too bad. Doug is only at 10.9. I'm at 10.7. The minimum start altitude or maximum start altitude is 12,000. So there's a lot of people still pretty low. You can see 9.8 struggling here. 7 Victor looks like he's already started. He does very well for the day. He's third for the day, Ray Gimme. So it turned out to be a good thing to get high over the pine nuts and just come in and go back for the start and not try and wait around all day to find the right climb to come out the top, because it wasn't going to be there. There's Rick Walters, and here's Doug, and I think they actually find me my first thermal. So good, starting behind actually works out. I get marked there by Doug and Rick, and they find us 8 knots basically, and we take that for 3,000 and get up to probably 15,000 or so. Tom Kelly joins me. Dennis and Ray are leading the pack well down the track here, and Gary Ittner is following, and those guys are quite a bit lower. So this was actually a really good start, even though I started 1,300 feet below the top. Good markers out ahead, got high relatively quickly, and started relatively early. And just looking back, as Dave Nadler says in his blog, a lot of people are struggling to get up here. And you can see them low back there, and that's going to make things difficult for them for sure. So here's our first turn. Tiger up here, you can see it here on the 2D. Let's slow it down just a little. So our lower guys ahead are forced to climb, and we're able to roll over the top of Gary and Dennis. And we have good markers out ahead, great markers out ahead. Ray Gimme, Rick Andrebo, and Doug Jacobs. And here, I remember flying with Tom here. This is a really fun day. He outclimbs me in the first climb, but Tom and I are side by side here, looking at each other, moving left and right based on who's got the best lift. and it was really fun flying with Tom for this leg. And you can see we're all shifted down a gear or two. We're flying 100, not 130. It's weaker, we're lower, 11,000, 10,000. It's just a slower day. So coming into the high ground here on the way into Tiger, that's the standard operating procedure. And must be feeling something here. And what do we find? Yeah, 2.6 knots. Not very good. So, and only 600 feet, and we spend 2 minutes doing it. So it's a much weaker day. And now, faced with a little bit of a challenge. The Tiger Valley is not a strong lift area. The high ground here is, so you definitely want to try and find a climb off the high ground before going out to hit Tiger. And that had to be a concern. And there's no clouds today. So I moved over to Tom. Tom had better air. And what does Tom find us? 5 knots. Thank you, Tom. Much better. Dennis is marked for that as well. So early here, Doug, Papa 7, 7 Victor, and Yankee Charlie they started just a little bit ahead. They've already hit the turn point and they're on their way back, and we're marking for them, but they're quite a bit lower. So I guess we're all about the same here at this point, because we have quite a bit more altitude. I'm at 12, Doug is at 10. So let's see how that comes out. And you can see one of the great climbers, Tom, is out climbing by a few hundred feet there, and Dennis caught up quite a bit. I think I go all the way into the back of this. Nope, just touched it. There's Grant Martin, who I think is 6th for the day. So initially, Rick and Drebo, Doug Jacobs, and Ray Gimme have really moved out ahead. There's a ghost trace here. I remember Tom moving. There was another glider climbing out here that has an unsynchronized IGC file. And then Tom goes up the valley here and really gets hurt. You can see that Ray Gimme was going up the valley as well. Doug is going for the pine nuts, and Yankee Charlie is going for the pine nuts, and that benefits the results. Here's Dave Nadler, and you can see a lot of guys still back in the starting area, or quite a bit behind at this point. So let's see, Doug is at 12, I'm at 11, so Doug's way above and way ahead. So he's done his normal thing. So early advantage to Doug Jacobs and probably Ray Gimme here. So 4.1 knots. I think I'm full of water, or maybe, I don't know, 5 to 10 gallons down on the wings, because I had to come back and land to fix that pitot tube. Who's in here with us? Rick Walters on his way into Tiger, and Dennis Linekin, who's almost caught up to me, and Grant Martin and Dave Nadler. Here comes Tim Wells. And let's just look at Tom Kelly, and you can see Tom here going down the valley. So I'm at 11.3. That's a little low. Doug's up ahead at 9.4, and just basically that's right on the ridge level. So his efficiency to this point is really high, and he's got a really high probability of finding a climb here. And let me just look here. I know I talked to Tom after this flight. I know he regretted going in there, and he's down to 10,000 over there, and really just struggles finding climbs in the low. There's aerated fields and just not a lot of heating here. So you can see Doug, he's halfway up the Pine Nuts already. I'm just entering the lowlands to the north, and Ray, Gary Ittner, and Rick and Drebo. I'm doing about 100 of ground speed. It's relatively light wind, so that's probably very close to the indicated airspeed. And 100 full of water is pretty standard. It's kind of a low gear. Dennis finds a miss. So I come back in pretty close to the group here. Let's take a look. So they've marked me that thermal, which makes it easy. It's 5 knots. And Ray Gimmy's on top. He's at 11.2, and I'm at 10,000. So a 1,200 foot gain, and I think he started slightly ahead of me. So it's about even. Doug is doing Doug's thing. He's way down the track. But this group is flying relatively even, with the exception of Rick and 15 meter. It's a weaker day, so he's definitely carrying a little bit of a handicap. Ray and Gary behind, but on top. And I pull in here with Rick, 6.3 knots for another 800 feet. So as Dave Nadler says in his blog, I mean, the best way to run down the mountain range is in this weak stuff is, run, wait for a strong core, bumping along, hit that core, climb a little bit, and keep going. And usually these thermals were narrow and small, didn't go super high, but you could gain altitude and go pretty fast down the mountain ranges if you were selective in when you turned. So just looking out here, you can see that Doug is, well, this is 5 miles, so that's a 5 mile radius, so 10 miles. So Doug is 10 miles ahead in not even 2 full legs, and yeah, so he's really quite efficient. Let's see here. He's down 1,000 feet below me and 10 miles ahead, just to give you an idea of how efficiently he's flown. This pack is together and working together quite nicely, and Ray Gimme is kind of the leader of our pack, a little bit ahead of us. Now the first turn point, or the next turn point here, is Ranch. Doug is running down, using the Pine Nuts as best he can before he turns out to go there. So what do we find here? Another 5 knots for another just short of 1,000 feet. And I think I was thinking about dumping some water here because I was falling to the bottom of the climbs. I can't remember if I dumped or not. Big pull up for Ray. 4 knots. I get 6 knots out of it for 1,200 feet. So Doug just touched Ranch. He's down to 9,500. That's probably not quite enough to get around here. He's going to have to struggle and go around terrain for sure to get in there. So that might have cost him a little bit. I think he does get slowed down here a little bit, maybe just a little bit too aggressive. You can see Tom Kelly is about even with us, but he's lower. He's down at 9,000 here, and we're at 13,000. So we've gained 4,000 feet on him, and he's really struggling to get down in there high. So that's what going through the valley did. And it looks like he is the only one to do that. Dennis Linnekin's fallen behind just a little bit. And the leaders of our group are Gary Ittner and Ray Gimme, with Doug Jacobs way ahead. So everybody's trying to tank up as much as they possibly can before going out and hitting Ranch and then Topaz, and then hoping to have enough to get out onto the Pine Nuts. You can see Doug coming back onto the Pine Nuts right now. I'm going to switch the view just a little bit so we can see what he does as we fly along here. Yeah, he looks like he's stuck behind the terrain. Let me go over to Doug for just a second. You can see his view there. He's below the terrain. This is the main ridge of the Pine Nuts here, but he's high enough to duck through this little saddle and get onto the face at least. There's not a lot of wind today, so it's not violent. Maybe 10 miles per hour out of the west, but you can see what he was faced with. And there we are with Gary Ittner leading, 7 Victor, and then 7 Tango, Martin Grant, and Rick and Drebo. We have to hit that turn point, and then hit this turn point, and then come out to the Pine Nuts. So I'll go back over to me. There's Doug, and here we go. So just keeping an eye on Doug. You can see him right here working his way back in, actually. You can see he went through that saddle. And this is the Pine Nuts, and he's heading back up to the Dayton turn point. So Papa 7 just touches. 4-3, 7 Tango, I went to the back. There's Tom Kelly coming in a little bit below us. So he just lost a little bit of altitude. And this was interesting. So I've calculated with my computer that I can make it in here really easily. And I can see Gary ahead and a little bit below. So I have a marker out there. And I think I can see the flashes from a glider out here, which I don't know is Doug Jacobs, but I'm comfortable. So I just go straight to Topaz and onto the Pine Nuts. And Rick and 4-3 and maybe 7 Victor deviate and go back to the high ground looking for a climb before hitting Topaz and back onto the Pine Nuts. I think that was a mistake. It turned out, I think, to be one on this day. Here's Tom taking 1 knot, so he's in a world of hurt there. There's Gary. 7 Victor doesn't do the deviation. Ray Gimme hangs in right with me. So Gary finds me a climb. Always good to have markers. 5.5 knots, and Ray comes in as well. We just take a couple turns and jump back on. And you can see we're coming back onto the Pine Nuts a little cleaner than Doug did, so we gained a little bit back. So here we are coming onto the Pine Nuts here. We're at 9, so we're 700 feet above Doug, and instead of being 10 miles behind, we're like 5 miles behind now. So through that section, he took a little bit too much risk, got caught here, took 2 or 3 thermals and had to deviate quite a bit, and we're able to hit Topaz and come right back onto the high ridges. So couldn't have a better marker, sort of a teacher to walk me through how to climb up here, and Gary Ittner, and Ray Gimme just behind. And I think I get left in the dust here by the professors. So they just outclimb me like crazy, and this is probably where I'm starting to think that Ray Gimme is magical with his climbs. So I'm lower. I get 4.2 knots out of it, and Ray gets 4.9, and Gary gets 4.5. So they just did better in entering, I suppose. And got away from me here a little bit. You can see Doug circling up ahead, still struggling to get up. He's still below 11,000. So this is a nice climb for me, 2,000 feet, 4.2 knots, still with most of my water. And so I give up. I feel like I'm separated from what they have, and I leave early. So Doug Jacobs, Dennis Lineken's actually caught up quite a bit. Ray Gimme and Gary Ittner and Sean Fiddler. So those are the 5 leaders here at this point, although I'm much lower than these guys. Actually, Ray Gimme's really getting higher back there. Oh, here I go. I find 4.8 knots. Ray's climbing at 6. So more of a gain for Ray. Papa 7 is climbing at 5, so a little gain for Gary. And here's Rick and Dribo. And 4-3 is probably back here a little bit. And these guys were even with us at the ranch turn point, but deviated into the mountains. So there's Doug going for Dayton. Ray just absolutely crushed me along this mountain ridge. It's almost like he's in wave or something. He's up at 14 and I'm at 12, so he gained 2,000 feet on me, and we were even just 10 miles ago entering the Pine Nuts. Still a lot to learn. So there's Doug. He's hit Dayton. He's coming back onto the Pine Nuts again. See Doug. And here we are entering, so I went to the very back of that turn as well. And I think what I was thinking was these guys are above me and ahead of me. The best thing that I can do is get behind them so that I can at least see them. And by going all the way to the back, I get at least a better view of what they're going through as they're coming back onto the Pine Nuts. So you can see what that little deviation into the mountain range before hitting Tiger. Here's Grant, and here's Rick. So we've gained 10 miles on them or so, even though they're a little higher. Call it 5 miles. It was a good move to get high enough to do that direct. So Ray and Papa 7 are considerably higher than I am, but I do find a really good climb here. 6.9 knots for 3,000. 7 Victor basically the same, a knot less, and Papa 7 the same. So 6 to 7 knot climbs there. So the Pine Nuts are still working. You gotta maximize your time in the high ground. So now same altitude, but they've converted a 3 or 4 mile lead. Rick and Dribo caught up. Dennis Lincoln just behind. And Doug. Let me zoom out just a little bit so we can see where Doug is in space. So you can see Doug there. So he's sort of pulled out his 10-mile lead again. He's at 12.8, or sorry, he's at 11. I'm at 12.8. So he's 10 miles ahead, but I'm 2,000 feet above. And Papa 7 and Ray Gimme, where's Ray? Out here are even closer. So we're maybe catching up to Doug a little bit. Certainly Ray is. So Doug has hit double springs and is now on his last assigned leg back up to Carson, I believe. So I've had 4.6 knots for a few turns, 500 feet. So we're all going into double springs here. Ray Gimme's at 12.8. Gary Ibner's at 12.7, and I'm at 12, so 700 to 800 feet below the guys and behind. Get my butt kicked a little bit, but keeping them in sight. So it looks like Gary just touches. Looks like Ray is going to go to the back pretty much. To the back as well, but make a 270-degree turn. Oh well. Okay, so this was interesting. I decide that I'm high enough now to hit Carson. It's the last assigned turn, and get back. I've screwed up here in my programming of the task. It looks like so. Let me double check. Yeah, Carson is the last assigned turn. And let me pull up my tasks real quick. Oh, Flanagan. Well, let me change that. What is Carson? 9. Reassign the task. Okay, so there now we have Carson and then Dayton. And interesting to note, you can see me right here. This is 7 Victor, Ray Gimme, who's kind of deviating into the lowlands of the pine nuts. And then this, I believe, is Papa 7. So he's deviating completely for the high ground of the pine nuts. So a few different ideas. And it looks like Ray Gimme and Doug Jacobs had the same idea of kind of going this middle compromise of the lowlands. I think I go pretty much direct and have a fairly good run, although this first thermal looks like a miss. Yep. So I'm at 10, my computer has me getting to Carson and back to Minden, no problem. And if I find a climb, good for me. And I just remembered what happened. So here's what I'm looking at. And there's one decent sized mountain right here. And I figure if there's going to be a climb out here with 12 to 15 mile per hour west wind, it's going to be right here. And I get one without all the deviation that these guys are doing. So they were 800 feet above and a mile or two ahead, something like that. And Doug, where are you? So Doug's finding a climb over the same mountain that I found a climb over, and it's relatively good, 3.7 knots. Doug's at 10 and I'm at 95, 10.3, so he's 1,000 feet above. And here I am, I've made my little deviation here. Maybe I saw a flash of Doug, and there I go. So I found the big kahuna, 6.4 knots for 3,000 feet. I thought I was closer to the mountain than I was there, but anyway, I got lucky. Maybe it's actually coming off of this little mound. But I did deviate for, it's a blue day, and I did deviate for the high ground, so I'll give myself a little bit of credit. So now, this puts me in a really good spot. I was going to be a little early if I just went straight in. So now I've got my card out and I'm thinking, what can I tack on after Carson? And that ends up being Dayton. It's straight downwind. I was worried about sink in the valley. I could have always deviated around here in the high ground, but it works out really well. And you can see 7 Victor and Papa 7 are way over here. They're quite high, it looks like, 14,000 feet, but they've deviated a ton to do it. Here's Doug. So this is interesting. I haven't really seen what Doug did yet, but Doug is probably looking at tacking on pine nut, or maybe, well, he can't do double spring again because you'd have to put something in between it. So maybe he's thinking pine nut double spring finish. And I think he ends up just doing pine nut, or we'll have to watch it, see what he does. Here comes 7 Victor, Ray Gimme, and Papa 7. So they're quite a bit higher. I got up to 11.2 and they are at 13, but I'm ahead and I'm closer to the turn point. Let me do a little trick here to get the turn points to render. Okay, so there you can see the turn point at Carson, and I programmed in where I went, but this was actually the last assigned turn point. So, you know, at the end of Carson, if you can fit more in between the 3 hours or increase your average speed, you're more than welcome to hit up to 11 total turn points in a modified assigned task. So here we go. I'm going to make it first. I'm at 10.6 and Ray is at 12. So 1,500 feet, but I'm a little bit ahead. And I have plenty of altitude to hit Dayton and make it back. And I've really gained on Gary Ittner by doing that. And let's just take a look at what Doug's doing. So Doug is, here, so he's halfway back. He's got Pine Nut to hit, or Double Spring to hit, or Alpine County to hit. So I take a little miss there. You can see Doug right here. Just touch into Dayton. Ray goes a little farther. So it looks like Doug's going to hit Pine Nut and then come back in and actually Dayton was a little farther from Minden than Pine Nut, so I think I added a little bit more distance. So looks like he's going to go past Pine Nut and try and get to Double Spring. And it looks like he's going to get to Double Spring and get back. So he must have been over time. Definitely went farther. So we went 240, I went 233, but I did it in 301 and he did it in 308, which allowed me to just barely nip him out by 0.7 miles per hour. So you can see Doug here. Not sure where Gary Ittner went. Oh, there's Gary. He hit Dayton and went to the back of Dayton, and now he's coming back out of the Pine Nuts. Let's look at Gary for a second. Oh no, Gary went all the way down to Double Spring. So Gary did the same thing that Doug Jacobs did. Interesting. I'll just play this at really high speed and see what he did. Oh, so Gary hit Carson, did not do Dayton. Yeah, he did what Doug did. Hit Pine Nut, hit Double Spring, and then back home. Interesting. So that is the day. Once again, after this day, first place was Doug Jacobs with 150 points on Rick Walters, who had a little bit of a bad day. So more than half of those points actually came out of today. Gary Ittner, who was 5th overall for the day, was in 3rd place. John Cochran, 4th. And Bill Gawthorpe had a little bit of a tough day, 10th and in 5th place. I had a great day, 1,000 points, and moved up, I think, one place to 6th. And just ahead of Grant Martin. Well, actually, about 200 points ahead of Grant Martin, so I had a good cushion behind me. And then Pete Alexander and the group behind. So, fun day. I really enjoyed the assigned task and made a really good decision at the end of it. But most of that was the timing was perfect to do it, so it was sort of a no-brainer for me to do that. And I think Gary and Doug they're so fast, they were thinking that they could pull that last leg off even quicker than they did. And I got lucky beating them, but I'll take it. Thanks for watching.